Assalamualaikum, my name is Taimur Sikandar and welcome back to another part of the CityGuide application tutorial. Today we are going to create the sessions in Android Studio and we are going to learn sessions, or you can say shared preferences in Android from scratch. So you again have to watch the video step by step to understand them completely. So let's just run our application. Click on this plus icon at the right top corner and go for the login. Now inside we have to enter the right phone number because we are getting the data from Firebase and we are going to store them in session, and then when the next activity or the new activity is going to be called, we are going to show that data on that specific activity. So let's add a password. Make sure your internet is on, and we are redirected to the new activity, and you can see a phone number and a full name we have stored in the database are shown here in this retailer screen. So this is what basically we are going to create. You can store or get all these fields, but I have just get the basic phone number and the full name here. But we are going to store everything in that session and we can get everything from the session in any activity. So let's get started. Open Android Studio and we are inside the login, in which we are going to perform the sessions or to create a sessions in the login. And in the previous tutorials we are basically getting the data from the Firebase and we are checking internet connections, creating progress bar, etc. But today when we have the data from the Firebase, so let's go to login.java. Basically this is the function executed when user presses the on click. So open this. The first thing we need to check internet connection, then we validating the fields, and then we get all the fields if validated, and combine phone number with the country code picker to create a complete phone number. After that we are checking with the database. If this phone number exists, then we get its password and match that password with the user provided password. If that matches, we are getting basically all the data from Firebase database. And in here now, when we have all the data, before moving to the next activity, we want to create a session in which we want to allow the user to log in, and also we want to store all these values inside the session so we can use them in all other activities. So instead of, there are basically two ways. We can simply create a session right away in here, and the second way, as we need to use these sessions in other activities as well. When we want to update any data, we need to update the session as well. So instead of calling or creating a session every time, why not we create a single Java file and name it session manager, so it can be accessed everywhere, and so we can only use a specific functions. So inside this database folder, I am going to create new Java class and going to name it session manager. Click OK. Basically in the Java session there is no session actually. It is called shared preferences inside Java, inside Android, and in other languages you can call them sessions. I'm repeating again by naming it a session because most of the people don't know about the shared preferences, they know about the session. So that's why I'm calling a word session and created here a session manager. So it is basically shared preferences and they cannot destroy in Android Studio unless we destroy them by ourselves. Let's get started with the session manager. So the first thing, as I told you, it is not a session, it is shared preferences. So this is the shared preferences. Basically we are creating variables. So shared preferences, name it user session. Then we need one more thing, which is shared preferences, because we want to edit it, then we need its editor. So let's say it's editor. Then we need a context. Basically the context means if we create the session inside directly in this login, means we are creating it inside an activity, then we don't need any context. But in here in the session manager, because it is a Java file and many other activities are going to call, so we need to know that which activity is calling. So the context means which activity is trying to call this Java class. Just make it context simply. Okay, now the next thing is we need to create variables, static variables that cannot be changed, but we can call them publicly. So the first one is private static final, and it is string, and let's just name it is login. and it is going to have a string value is logged in. Basically the login is private because we don't want the user to access this function or this keyword which is login, because we're going to create a function on it which is login, but we need some public variables and they should be static and final, because we are not allow any user to change them from outside the class, so they should be static and final, and again they have to be in a string format. And now we need to define its name, and I am going to define them in a capital so we can identify easily that these are basically sessions, and it is going to contain some name which is full name, or let's just keep the format. Control plus D to duplicate as many lines as we want. Okay, now we have created basically all the variables we need from the database, or we need sessions for all these variables, so we need to change their names as well here. Okay, we created all the variables, and these are variables basically we want to create a session for. So once we created this, we need to create a constructor, and inside this constructor we need to get a context, and also we want to make this constructor public constructor so it can be accessed from outside. By default constructors are public. So inside you can see we have created the variables. This is the first function, or the constructor function. So the first thing we need to define is shared preferences. So user session is equal to context. Again, because we are calling them from outside, so we need to define the context dot get shared preferences. The first thing we need to define is the name of this current shared preferences. So let's say you can create you want to create 2 to 3 sessions, one for onboarding screen, then you have to define a separate name here, one for let's say the one we are creating user session. So this is the name which will distinguish or stored or identify which session user is trying to access. So I'm going to create this session with the name of user session, or user login session maybe. So after the string we need to define its mode. So it's mode underscore private, by default it's 0, and a semicolon. So by this way we are going to create a session. Every time this session manager will be called and this is going to be executed, it is going to either check that if session with this name is created, then it is going to get it here to be used, and if it is not created, it is going to create it. After the session we need to set the context is equal to this context. Actually we need this context at the top here, and by this under context you can change it to context. This is simply same, but for accuracy of the rules. So the next thing we need to define is the editor is equal to user session dot edit. So basically this editor is going to we are going to allow this session or user session or the shared preferences to edit using this word which is editor. So by this permission, whenever we will call the editor, we can edit it inside this user session. We can add the data, we can remove the data or update it. So we have created the constructor. So the next thing we want to create is a public function, create login session, and inside this function basically we want to get all the fields for which user want to store the data. So let's just first define all the names in a string. Okay, we have created all these parameters, or we define all the parameters with the full name, username, all these values we get from other activities. When they are going to create a session, basically we will create or we'll call this function to create a session. Okay, inside here the first thing we need to do is we need to store a boolean inside is login. So we will write editor, because using editor we can edit or add or delete something inside the session. So we will put boolean, and we need to define the string we already created is login. So in the is login basically contains the string which is logged in, and the second thing is this is a key value session. So second thing is a boolean. So we will pass true. So now you can see we have added true to is login, this means that whenever we are going to call this is login and we try to get its session, we will get true. That means user is logged in. Now let's add all these values by the same way. Editor dot put not boolean, but this time we are going to put string, and we need to define key, full name, and then the value we have received here, and then semicolon. So by this way we are going to add all these values, and let's just change their names. Okay, now we have added all these values, we have added all these keys, basically strings we defined here, and all the values of that string we need to update, or we need to create a session for. And then at the end we need to write editor dot commit. So this commit, if we are not going to write this commit at the end, then session is not going to store any data, or this editor is not going to update anything in the session. Okay, now in here there's one more thing that you need to understand to get the data from the session. It is basically you can see we are storing it in a key and value pair. So this is a key and this is a value. So if we want to get this session, we need again a key value thing. So after this we need to create another function which is public, and then we are going to use hash map here in a key value. So we are storing the string and getting the string, so we will define both strings here because we are storing the string as well, and we are getting the value in a string. So this is a return type because we are going to put all these values in a hash map, and we are going to send them to the user who is trying to get all these values, get user detail from session. So this is a function we are going to create. So its return type is hash map. So first thing we need to define is hash map because we want to return it, and again its type are going to be strings. Let's name it users data is equal to again hash map, and we need to define new here, new hash map, and that's it. So we have created hash map because we are going to return this user data to this, but the first thing we need to get all these values we stored here, and we are going to get them and store them in the users data. So we will write users data dot put, and you can see we have to put the string key and value. So key we already defined, let's say key underscore username. So this is basically a key, and now we get the values from session using preferences, or the preferences name user session dot get string, and what we want to get is basically the name we have stored is again key underscore full name, and then the value is nothing, so we will pass simply null here. That's it. So basically we are adding the data inside this hash map. The first thing is string. This is a key. We use this key as we have defined the capital, which is username, and then we have the value we get from the session like this, and as the session is already stored in key value pairs, so we get the string like this way, key which is going to be full name, and as we are not storing anything, so we will pass null, but we have to pass anything here. So by this way we are going to get full name and stored inside this users dot put. So let's just duplicate it. Okay, now we have defined all these values here, so you just have to be very careful while just duplicating or copying them and pasting them here. So you just have to be careful that right username should be placed against right name. You are getting username, storing it inside the full name, then it might be a problem. So now at the end just we need to return users data. Now after that we need to check that if user is logged in or not. So let's create public boolean, and let's name it check login. So this is a function which will be executed. Okay, now in here we will write if preferences or the user session dot get boolean. As you can see, when the user is logged in, we are going to store it as is login to true, here, and we haven't set to false. So now we are just going to check that if user is logged in or not by calling this one get boolean, and it is login, and then we can pass anything, but we have to define the boolean. So as we are getting, so it is going to return this data, but we can, let's say, pass true here. So as this is a condition, this is not going to set this as true, but it is just going to return its value, anything stored in it, either true or false, not the semicolon at the end, but it's a if. So if it is going to return true, as you can see, I have not added any exclamation mark or the not sign. So if it is true, then we will return true here. Otherwise, in the else, we are going to return false. So by this way, we are going to check that if user is logged in or not. So inside the logout function, public void logout, we need to basically clear everything. Editor dot, we need to call this clear. So it is going to clear everything in this session, and also editor dot commit to accept all these changes. So let's just make it logout user from session. Okay, so this is a logout function. We have a login function as well. So let's just make it false here. It doesn't matter, but it's up to you. Press Alt Control L to align the code. Okay, so that's it for the session manager file. So let's head back to the login. Now we need to call that session manager class by creating its instance. Session manager is equal to new session manager, and in here you can see it is showing the error because we need to pass the context. It is calling the constructor this one, and it is asking for the context here, and we will pass login dot this. So we are basically passing the context here to the session. So once this context is passed, so we can call the function session dot create login session, and in here you can see we have to define all these things. So we will pass all these values to create a session we get from the Firebase. So we have full name. So by this way we have passed all these values, and the error is gone. This means that it is going to create a session for us. So let's just call our function for the next class to check if we have received anything in the session or not. So let's just start an activity, new intent, and get application context, and let's just create a retailer dashboard dot class. So we need to define or to create this activity. So let's go to location owner and right click new, create a new activity, empty activity, and retailer dashboard, and click finish. So we have retailer dashboard. Press Alt Enter to import the class, and the error is gone. Press Alt Control L to align this code. Okay, now we are basically calling this activity, and we are not passing anything, but we have the session. We are going to get that data and show it inside the next activity. So let's go to retailer dashboard, and in here add a text view, and now we are going to set everything inside this text view. Okay, now inside the retailer dashboard, let's create a text view. Find view by id, r.id.text view, and now we are going to set everything inside this text view. But now first we need to get the session manager class we have created. Session, its variable, and again new session manager, and we have to pass the context. Okay, after this we are going to call session manager dot get users detail from session. Okay, now we have to basically use hash map as we stored in the hash map. So let's say hash map, and as you remember that we created their types as string, and let's just name it detail is equal to this thing. Okay, as this is returning the hash map, so we get everything returned here inside this user details. So now we can full name is equal to users detail dot get, and inside to get that value to specific value we stored, we need to define the name. So the name should be exactly same. So by this way now you are going to get that why I left all the variables public. So let's just call this class session manager. So you have to call that whole class, which is session manager dot key underscore. Now you can see all the variables. Basically these are the strings. Let's call the full name, and that's it. So by this way we are going to get the data, and now we are going to show it on the text view. Text view dot set text. Let's just set the full name plus \n for the new line, and again a phone number. Now let's try to run the application. Okay, now our application is running. Let's click on this plus icon, go for the login, make sure your internet is on, and let's add all the values we have in the database. So click login, and yes, we are successfully redirected to the retailer dashboard screen, and you can see we have two texts inside the text view. The first is name, and then we have a phone number. So that's it. This means we have created a session successfully. If you have any questions, you can tell me down below in the comments, and if you learn something new, please like the video, and if you are new to the channel, please subscribe it. You can get all the codes of the login and sign up from the description below of each video, because now onward I am going to add all the codes on my website. So you can visit my website taimursikandar.com, and also you can get the link in the description below. So again, thank you for watching. Take care. Allah.